You're listening to the audio production of Alaska is Made of Gold, Buying an Alaskan Gold Mine by Tom Rohn. Published by Tom Rohn and read by Martin Oldani. Chapter 1, Introduction. Nothing is more exciting than finding gold in your sluice box. Suddenly, the big investment and hard work is way more than worthwhile. Then add in Alaska, with its amazing hunting and fishing, and you have the best adventure money can buy. I know, because I own a placer mine in the last frontier, and life just doesn't get any better than that. Chapter 2, Take Your Pick. I learned about gold mining from Alaskan old-timers who had been in the business since before statehood. And they learned to trust me because I bought and sold the bush planes they needed to access their claims. Remember, the state doesn't have many roads, and the richest ground is always out in the middle of nowhere. As a result, forget about mining if you're a member of the United Sissies of America, which describes lots of people in the lower 48. You can be dredging a rich pay streak only to see a brown bear coming upriver. You better know what you're doing when you buy an Alaskan gold mine, or it will be the end of you, financially or otherwise. There are 3 kinds of gold claims frequently advertised for sale in Alaska: federal claims, patented land, and state leaseholds. I always tell people to forget about mining on Bureau of Land Management federal claims anymore. It's just not worth the risk, let alone the hassle. Since the federal government is now so overrun with greenies, it's only a matter of time before they figure out how to bankrupt you with violations and lawyer costs. It's the old story. Hi, I'm from the IRS and I'm here to help you. Patented land is federal property that was proved up in the old days as having gold deposits, then subsequently deeded to the prospector who made the discovery. It's great stuff if you can afford to buy it, because it's like any other real estate where you don't have an insane amount of government regulation. Unfortunately, Congress no longer funds this program, so patenting mining claims is no longer possible. Alaska state leaseholds are the best way to go. They usually come in 40-acre parcels and only cost $206 a year each. For all practical purposes, you own the land. And depending on its location, you might be permitted to build cabins and storage sheds for your crew and equipment. These long-term 5 to 20-year leases are renewable, providing you behave yourself and file your annual labor reports before September 1st of each year. No excuses allowed. Miss that date and you forfeit your leasehold. It's critical you understand that owning an Alaskan gold claim, state leasehold, and actually mining there are separate issues. You can buy a claim simply by obtaining a quitclaim and paying the seller for it, but you can't mine there without having an approved mining plan on file with Alaska's Division of Mining, Land, and Water. They're good for about 5 years, depending on how many years you initially request. I can't remember the number of times I've heard about somebody buying a gold claim, getting really excited about it, and then he got into trouble because there wasn't an approved mining plan, which includes a reclamation bond on file with the state. And he was caught digging up the place. Once again, owning an Alaskan gold claim and mining are 2 different ballgames. Arguably, an approved mining plan is just as valuable as the claim itself, especially now with Division of Mining, Land, and Water telling everyone it takes at least a year for them to approve mining plans. So make doubly sure the seller gives you one, and don't leave home without it. Chapter 3, Birds and Bees. It's now time to explain the birds and bees to you. Think facts of life. The only Alaskan mining claims that get advertised have issues of one kind or another. Not enough gold to cover expenses, let alone pay back the investment, is the usual one. But it's always some witch doctor's jinx of too much overburden or too much permafrost, or not enough water, or all of the above. Buyer beware. It's really not that hard to understand. Who in the world would ever sell his Alaskan gold mine if it's really profitable? Owning one is like having a tax-free, money-printing machine in your own backyard. So why would you ever sell it? All the rich mines go to the kids or close friends and hardly ever get advertised. And it's just like the 1953 Corvette setting up on blocks in some old lady's garage just down the street. And she has a bunch of grandkids who keep hanging around. Do you really think you will ever get to buy it? I still laugh to myself about the cagey old miners who would come into my sales office on Lake Hood, the world's largest float plane base that sits alongside Anchorage International Airport, and ask about buying one of the bush planes I had tied down out front. Back and forth we'd go, with part of it being told how hard mining was and how they'd never really made any money and couldn't afford what I was asking for the one they wanted. Finally, we would agree to a price, and then they'd ask if they could pay me in gold. Yep, and out comes coffee cans so heavy it takes 2 hands to lift them. The point in telling you all this is to give you a better insight into what really goes on. Successful Alaskan gold miners are usually from old-time families who've been working the same ground for 20 or 30 years, if not longer. They're from famous frontier places like Fairbanks, McGrath, Nome, Ruby, and Wiseman, where there has always been good nugget gold, right along with lots of coarse and fines that make up the bulk of what's found in sluice box cleanups. They're hardworking, super secretive, and deal in cash, which means no one has any idea how much money they are making. Remember, gold isn't taxable until you sell it, and somehow they never get around to selling any. It's hard to find a better tax haven than a gold mine, where the only way in and out is by airplane or helicopter, where you have lots of write-offs on equipment, fuel, and maintenance, and where there's no record of anything unless you sell to a licensed refiner. How sweet it is. My 2 favorite gold yarns are about the Fairbanks attorney who supposedly has a room with a false wall that rolls sideways to display his 5,000-ounce gold collection, his share of a mining venture. And then the Ruby, Alaska family with a chest freezer full of gold they've mined from claims passed down through the generations. Whether these stories are true or not, I don't know. But I do know Alaska's biggest nugget was found near Ruby in 1998 and weighed almost 300 ounces. A miner saw it roll off the side of his cat blade while he was bulldozing permafrost so the ground could thaw. Google the Alaskan Centennial Nugget to see it for yourself, right along with a bunch of other monster nuggets that have been found in the state. Then there is the Fort Knox Mine, 25 miles northeast of Fairbanks, that produced 409,845 ounces of gold in 2016 alone, let alone made millions of ounces since opening in 1995. Alaska is made of gold. For those who are now asking, wow, what keeps somebody from stealing all that gold? Well, using Ruby as the best example, how do you think you'll pull that off? It's a remote native Alaskan village where you must fly in and out. There are lots more sled dogs than the 160 people who live there year-round, and all the dogs start barking whenever a stranger comes within a mile. And to make matters worse, everyone from the kids on up carry bear guns because it's grizzly country. Not to mention they don't get to eat if they don't meat hunt every day. Ever hear about what happened to Jesse James and his gang in Northfield, Minnesota? Anyway, good luck if you decide to give it a try. After freeze-up, miners head straight home with their gold, which gets separated into fines, coarse, and nuggets, with special attention paid to anything that can be sold to collectors or made into Alaskan jewelry. Nice nuggets can be sold for 2 or 3 times what they're worth at spot gold prices, so smart miners have loyal buyers they deal with every year. Some miners even hang out in Las Vegas at the poker tables and use nuggets as card protectors. It works every time, and it never takes long before someone asks, "Hey, can I see that?" And pretty soon a stack of $100 bills changes hands. Not many people know that gold nuggets are rarer than diamonds, and collecting them has become a growing business. Another favorite story of mine, and one that aptly illustrates the ready market for gold nuggets, is about Terry Bradshaw, the celebrated Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback who won 4 Super Bowls in his 13-year NFL career. In 1985, CBS sent him to Alaska to host its TV coverage of the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race, the one that Libby Riddles won, the first woman ever to do so. He did a great job, and you can watch the original video on YouTube. Anyway, he told a bush pilot friend of mine that he wanted to buy a big gold nugget. Bradshaw's good old boy charm was a big hit with the bush pilots, mushers, and intrepid spectators he met during the couple of weeks he spent in Alaska on the Iditarod Trail, and he made lots of friends. Of course, it didn't take long, and he was introduced to a miner who had just the nugget he wanted. After lots of oohing and awing and good-natured quarreling over the price, a deal was made, and Bradshaw put the nugget in his pocket and went on his way. No place is more fun than Nome during the Iditarod. 1,000 people fly into town and start on what can only be described as a 2-week drunken binge. They play golf on the Bering Sea ice pack that's been painted green. They dress up like Old West prospectors and attend the Miners and Mushers Ball. They arm wrestle celebrity dog mushers, compete in wet t-shirt contests, play basketball and beer pong and bar hop until hell wouldn't have it. In 1900, Nome was the very last and wildest gold rush boomtown in this nation's history. And somebody forgot to tell it to stop. Don't go there unless you like self-destructive behavior. Finally, it was time for Bradshaw and my bush pilot friend to fly back to Anchorage. They boarded an Alaska Airlines flight, sat in back, and laughed about the good times they'd had following the Iditarod, which, by the way, should be added to your bucket list if you would like an unforgettable adventure and have the time and money to do it. Anyway, toward the end of the flight, my friend said, "Hey, let me see your nugget again." Bradshaw handed it over, and then after admiring it, my friend faked accidentally dropping it down through a floor vent into the belly of the airplane, although he'd really just palmed it. Horror of horrors. What are we going to do? What, you can't tear apart a 737 flying scheduled flights, are you kidding? No mechanic would ever admit he found it anyway. It's gone. Bradshaw took it like a man, and was every bit a good sport about his loss, and never once asked about getting paid back. My friend returned the nugget when they were taxiing in, and everyone laughed like crazy. Terry Bradshaw is just as fun in real life as he is on Fox NFL TV, and not many guys are as classy. Chapter 4. Call Me Minnie Mouse. Earlier I wrote about 3 kinds of mining claims: federal, patented, and state, and I outlined the differences. Now it's time to describe the 3 kinds of mines: the mini mine, the casino mine, and the mega mine. Names I made up long ago to better explain the investment and risks in Alaska gold mining. The mini mine is what I own. It's a single 40-acre claim where I built 2 work sheds for storage of my equipment, consisting of everything from a subcompact backhoe loader tractor to every hand tool known to God. Really important when you're 30 miles from the nearest road, let alone the long drive into town. I chose the property for several reasons, not the least of which was it was the right size for me. I wanted a place where I couldn't go broke, meaning I could work it all by myself, not depend on others for help, and my expenses would stay minimal. What's more, it was bordered by a world-class rainbow and salmon stream, which meant I could take time off and have fun, plus supplement my food supplies with fresh-caught fish. Bush life isn't so bad when you can eat garden vegetables. Lettuce and radishes grow in 30 days, and salmon anytime you want. Think happy smile. What's more, there was hillside spring water I could funnel into a long garden hose for drinking water, plus clean water from my panning table. In addition, I could dam up this spring and pipe high-pressure water into a sluice box, which would save big time on running a trash pump on gasoline. There's lots to think about when you're shopping for a mining claim. I also looked at alternative ways of making money off my claim. It makes no difference what size mine you buy, because they never come with any guarantee you'll find enough gold to pay the bills. To make my point, a successful Anchorage businessman, bush plane buyer, and friend once bought a placer mine near Nome, which is centered in an area with a long history of miners finding lots of coarse and nugget gold. He found 800 ounces in his first season. He bought more heavy equipment, a bigger wash plant, and hired extra help for the coming season. He found 80 ounces and went broke. I'm a big proponent, whether it's for mining or anything else, of starting small, building brick by brick, and don't start running without the ball. My claim has about 1 million birch trees on it, not to mention the surrounding wilderness, so I have an unlimited supply of wood burls and chaga, an odd parasitic mushroom that sells for big bucks as an anti-cancer supplement, along with its known potency in fighting everything from diabetes to viruses. It's the hot new health food. What's more, microdiamonds were found just a few miles away. So despite having better odds at winning the Powerball jackpot, it still gave me good reason to stay on the lookout for precious and semi-precious gems. All are great travelers and get carried downstream in whitewater rivers, so it's always smart to keep a sharp eye out for mineral deposits other than gold. The moral of the story is carefully survey mining properties for alternative ways of making money and don't get tunnel vision. Accordingly, I researched starting a YouTube brand business account, or in other words, uploading weekly stories for subscribers about my mini mine that would become popular, like the Discovery Channel's Gold Rush, Alaska. Not long ago, this would have been impossible. But nowadays, anyone with a smartphone and a drone can create audiovisual content that looks like it was done in Hollywood. The quality is amazing, and it's really not that hard to do. From scratch, I built the website for my bear alarm invention, the Pack Alarm, with this smartphone technology. You can see the quality of the pictures I took with an iPhone 7 and a Phantom 3 Pro on www.packalarm.net. And I'm a dumb dinosaur in comparison to the younger generations who grew up with this technology. The sky is the limit, or maybe I should say Mars, because artificial intelligence is now so advanced. Push a button, and the drone hovers at 4 feet and pantomimes, "What's next, master?" Want a close-up video of a brown bear? No problem. Want a video from 10 feet up of you gold panning in a river? Can do. Want a video of you running downstream trying to land a torpedo-sized king salmon? The drone will follow you like a trained dog, taking amazing video all along the way, and then it helps you edit your playback. It's scary how superhumanly smart these personal devices have become, and both have opened up money-making opportunities that were unimaginable only short years ago. Imagine the awesome YouTube videos that can be taken at my mini-mine, where there are bald eagles, bear, moose, porcupine et al. Running around every day, right along with catching 20-inch rainbows and 50-pound king salmon. Now cut to a sales pitch for bags of chaga, gold concentrate, and bottles of Alaska birch syrup. How cool is that? Brand name companies search for these YouTube websites and pay good money to advertise on them. I was a bit paranoid about theft protection when I chose my gold claim. As much as I hate to say it, the only thing people won't steal in Alaska is a red-hot stove if there's any way to access your property. Dredges, generators, pumps, and tools are like cash to them, so you must protect your equipment. I did this by buying a place where the only way in and out is by helicopter, which was easy for me since I fly them. Plus, there were a couple of guys at nearby airports who I could hire for sling loading and rides if I needed transportation. Embarrassingly, I had overlooked something. You can't let a helicopter set beside a salmon-spawning river for long periods of time because the bears will tear it apart. So I gave up on using my own helicopter, sold it, and chartered instead. It's not that expensive, everything considered. especially if you're smart enough to stockpile stuff on each end so the helicopter is always flying back and forth fully loaded. All in all, it cost me about $5,000 a year to run my mini mine, helicopter rides included, which is something I can afford and probably no more expensive than owning an Alaskan cabin. No way can I go broke. And I don't have to mow the lawn. My mini mine is lots more fun, let alone interesting, and has the potential of paying me back if I want to work hard, since there's way more to do than just dig for gold. Who can't spend a few $1,000s a year for a chance to strike it rich, especially when you're having so much fun doing it? In summary, maybe all you want is a mini mine, because it's so affordable to own one. You never know what you might find, all without the investment of hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, for a bigger mine. Think about it. Chapter 5. Don't Crapshoot. Most Alaskans want to sell what I call casino mines, which is a description that might upset some people, but it's really important you know what you're getting into before you buy one. For that reason, let me make sure your radar is on high alert. Alaska keeps statistical records, and there are more small-time gold mines by far than any other kind. They average 4.3 workers who use bulldozers, excavators, front-end loaders, and wash plants to process as much pay dirt as possible in the state's short mining season. The big thing to get into your head is placer mining is all about moving dirt, mountains of it, and the amount you move is directly proportionate to the gold you will recover. The second thing to keep in mind is there's no colder, dirtier, harder, wetter work in the world, and it's sometimes around the clock for no extra pay. Picture the worst road construction job you can find, and that's pretty much what you're getting into. Doesn't mean it won't make you rich, doesn't mean it won't be fun, but it's critical that you get into gold mining with your eyes wide open. If you're a professional crybaby or lazy, you better stay home. The third thing to focus on, and Sarah Palin, who ran for the White House with John McCain, said it best, drill, baby, drill. Although she wasn't talking about gold mining, but oil. Nevertheless, the same rule applies. You must, if there's any human way possible, test drill gold properties before investing in them, let alone buy the heavy equipment and wash plants it takes to operate them. Problem is, most Alaskan gold claims aren't accessible to the equipment it takes to do this. You're talking about drilling rigs and skilled geologists who specialize in pattern exploration of ore bodies. Then the analysis of the mineralized ground that gets augered up. It's all very scientific on the part of people who want to pay off their student loans as fast as possible, plus buy big homes, fancy cars, and winter vacations just like the rest of us. Small-time miners usually can't afford this. And that even assumes there's a bush airstrip nearby that's long enough for a cargo plane to drop off the necessary machinery. If there's no strip, then say hello to sling loading with a big helicopter and expenses flying off the charts. No pun intended. Tony Beats, the potty-mouthed wild man star of Discovery Channel's Gold Rush, is the prototypical miner everyone would like to imitate, except maybe for his constant use of the F-bomb. Although he's mostly a man of few words. It's a scream watching him on TV, and talk about straight talkers, he's the best. Gold mining is a never-ending battle of fixing things, but nowadays, most people are so afraid they might hurt someone's feelings or fail to be politically correct, they can't tell anyone what to do, even when lives are at stake. Tony doesn't have that problem. For example, he will tell an employee, "Come here." Then in the next breath, he'll say, "There's your fucking problem, okay? Fix it, bye." He then walks off. I absolutely love it. Reminds me of when I taught people how to fly airplanes and helicopters back in the day. As a chief pilot and flight instructor, you don't have time to worry about hurting somebody's feelings, or that you're somehow being abusive when he or she is trying to commit suicide, plus kill everyone else on board as well. Sometimes you have to slap people upside the head, so to speak, so they don't make dangerous mistakes again. Tony told Todd Hoffman the original main character back in the second season of Gold Rush Alaska, that he should just stay home if he doesn't test drill gold properties. Might as well drink coffee, he said. It couldn't have been plainer, and it finally sank into Hoffman's thick head. Let that be a lesson to you as well. I want to add background to the last few paragraphs so you have a better understanding of everything. First, Tony Beats is hardly a small-time miner anymore, since he's been legendary for a long time in and around Dawson City, Canada, the historic boomtown of the 1898 Klondike Gold Rush. No one has found more gold or shown more moxie about mining than him ever. From the humble beginnings of dairy farming and emigration from Holland, he's managed to work his way up to owning the best ground and recovering more gold than anyone, be it in Canada or elsewhere. He's worth $10 million, $20 million, who knows? And no one has more horsepower in placer mining than he has. Period. End of story. In the past, recovering more than 1,000 ounces of gold each season has been pretty much routine for him, but now he's aiming for lots more than that. To show you how strong-minded and forward-thinking he is, he's now operating a restored bucket line dredge on Eureka Creek in the Klondike Goldfields. Plus, he's adding a second that he's disassembled and barked 100 miles up the Yukon River to Dawson City. His first dredge is really big, but the latest one is gargantuan beyond belief. What Tony is doing is larger than life and will go down in history. The guy is amazing, and he proves what can be achieved if you do things right. Anyhow, the reason I've given emphasis to Tony Beats and Dawson City and the Klondike is that his mindset about test drilling might be a little different if he were based in Alaska. His gold properties are accessible by dirt roads. They are pretty primitive, but all will get you to where you want to go, whereas roads of any kind simply don't exist in the 49th state. Big difference when it comes to hiring people to test drill your ground at affordable prices as opposed to chartering cargo planes and monster helicopters to fly in drill rigs, let alone the crews that come with them. And that's presuming it can even be done in the first place. It all reminds me of what I've sometimes told wannabe miners in the past. If you have that much money, what the fuck do you want to go gold mining for? Consequentially, let's wonder about what Tony would do. The answer is improvise, which is what always happens at his gold mines anyway. And we have an important clue, because he never throws away anything and has collected an admirable boneyard of derelict equipment for spare parts and whatever. Wouldn't take him long to come up with a drill rig he could operate himself, and he'd pan down the test hole samples, do the math for the gold content per ton of pay dirt, and then he'd carry on with his business of placer mining in a professional way, or maybe I should say a scientific way. Alibaba.com lists all kinds of soil test drilling rigs manufactured in China that can be bought for plus or minus $10,000, not including shipping. Not long ago, I would have poo-pooed anything made over there, but not anymore, and that opinion is based on first-hand experience. I've traveled to Shenzhen, China to inspect plastic moldings I have made there before I have them shipped to me for final assembly of the pack alarm, my patented camping alarm. By leaps and bounds, that country has improved its quality control to the point of being competitive with almost everyone, especially when you consider mining equipment can be bought at a fraction of what you would pay here for the same thing. Sure, I would still trust our drill rigs more if I were running one daily for years on end. But to test drill a few hundred holes at the most, Alibaba, here I come. Regardless of the drill rig that you beg, borrow, or steal, it must be of sufficient diameter and length to do the job. Anything less than 2 inches and 50 feet is probably a joke, and it's another deal where size matters. If you're not clear on this, talk to your wife, girlfriend, or both to see how this works. Anyway, getting back on track, you must auger up enough dirt to fill a long line of those 5-gallon white buckets that every gold miner should keep on hand by the dozens. Label each with a black marker pen as you auger down, describing where the dirt came from, the depth, etc. Be precise about it, because your next stop will be at your panning table when you've finished your test hole, and it's time to evaluate what you found. It's really important that you build the aforesaid panning table not only for the next step, but for future use. Every time you turn around on a gold mine, you will find yourself needing to pan down pay dirt samples for visible gold. It's a never-ending game of hide and seek, where you almost always discover there's way too much dirt in that gold. As a result, you will quickly learn it's too backbreaking to squat down at a water pond to get the job done. After a few minutes, you can hardly stand up. And the older you get, the worse it gets. Don't torture yourself when you're analyzing pay dirt. The other thing you need for testing your drill hole dirt is a blue bowl. This ingenious device is almost magical in its ability to separate gold from the ubiquitous black sands and mineral debris that you've been panning down to a concentrate. Once again, you're trying to determine how much gold can be recovered per ton of pay dirt that will get processed through your sluice box setup. Hopefully, your math will come out at 5 or more grams, which is about a quarter ounce of gold. Old-time prospectors did their calculations by weighing the gold found in 80 pans, which supposedly equals a ton. Pick either method, but absolutely, positively complete a thorough test drilling and detailed analysis of any mine you want to buy. There's an old saying that's proven true way too many times. An Alaskan gold mine is a hole in the ground with a liar on top. Fly to Las Vegas if you want to piss away your money. Because betting the pass line and taking the odds is even money when you play craps, whereas 80% of all small businesses fail within 5 years. Don't take chances, especially if it's with OPM, other people's money. Last but not least, your test drilling must accurately measure the overburden and permafrost that's setting on top of the gold. This information is critical because you need to know what kind of heavy equipment it will take to economically operate a potential mine. A foot or two of black dirt and no permafrost means you could run a cheapskate mom-pop operation and simply use a backhoe loader tractor like those you see repairing water and sewer every time you drive around town. Opposite that is Alaska's Valdez Creek mine, where the gold is 100 feet deep. It's really rich ground, but you're talking about D10s, excavators, belly scrapers et al. And then you need millions of dollars for startup operations. For that reason, make absolutely sure to use your head and make smart decisions based on known facts, not fuzzy promises. There are endless horror stories of bankruptcies, divorces, and pissed-off partners because somebody got gold fever and didn't do his homework. Don't be that guy. There's an alternative to test hole drilling, and that's trenching with a tractor, like I mentioned in the last paragraph, which can dig down a dozen feet or more. As a practical matter, small-time miners should walk away from ground that requires stripping of more than 10 feet of overburden. 4 or 5 feet is probably all you want to deal with, and most prospective miners can't even afford to bulldoze away more than 10 feet, because once again, you're talking about heavy equipment that costs millions of dollars. Stunningly, it takes $1 million alone to buy a good used bulldozer, and then you got to get it there. Yikes. To expand on what I'm suggesting as door number 2, my little backhoe loader at my mini mine can dig down 6 feet, followed by me using a shovel and post hole digger to get down another 2 or 3 feet. This lets me cut a trench, expose topsoil sidewalls that lets me look for pay streaks trapped on top of bedrock and clay layers, determine groundwater levels, and finally decide if there's any gold at all to be found. This is something Tony Beets might do, though on a much larger scale, and is what I had in mind when I wrote about improvising. For crying out loud, old-time Alaskan prospectors thought nothing of using a pick and shovel to dig down 20 or 30 feet. Well, fine and dandy, you answer. But how in hell do I get a tractor, let alone a drill rig, out in the boondocks? Because I can't afford cargo planes and helicopters like you mentioned. And there ain't no airstrip where I need to go anyway. The answer is winter trails. The age-old Alaskans have hauled things around the state since the late 1800s. At first it was done with horses, sled dogs, and whatever else, moose included, that had 4 legs. But now it's done with snowmobiles and snowcats, or simply driven cross-country under its own power. All this can be approved as part of your mining plan, or be added as an amendment to your permit from Alaska's Division of Mining, Land and Water, and the BLM if it's federal property. Though lots of folks just take off across the boonies, believing it's a lot easier to say you're sorry than get permission from a bunch of pin-headed pencil pushers. In any event, driving heavy equipment to remote mining sites is old hat in the last frontier and happens every winter. Guys even specialize in the business and operate fleets of snowcats and king-size freight sleds for big loads. I even had a friend who drove his brand new excavator 80 miles from McGrath to his mining claims. It took an airplane and a couple of snowmobiles to figure out the best route, and he broke through some ice and had a hell of a time getting out in sub-zero temperatures, but he found his way through a trackless wilderness and got the job done. Guess that's why I say gold mining in Alaska isn't for sissies. Not to mention, you better like high adventure. The last crucial thing about small-time Alaskan gold mining is you must be a jack of all trades, or at least hire someone who is. It's impossible to go even a single day without having to fix something, your bulldozer, excavator, or front-end loader, but also your wash plant and sluice box setup, because rocks constantly beat the hell out of everything. Right along with that goes the requirement of having to build and maintain camp structures so you and your crew can eat and sleep. I like warning people that running a little mine is a long job. You must be a carpenter one day, a diesel mechanic the next, and then a welder on the third day. And this multitasking is never ending, or you can't stay in business. Of equal importance is always having the parts, tools, and supplies on hand to support this everyday activity. Once again, you're in the middle of nowhere, so there's no such thing as jumping into your pickup and running into town to get what you need. And Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Nome are never nearby. Even if you do have access to a road, you're on your own. My mention of hiring a jack of all trades leads to telling you that the state and federal labor laws apply to gold mining. The big wrinkle most miners miss is Alaska demands that overtime be paid for any hours after 8 each day, whereas it's a 40-hour work week in most places before overtime pay applies. All this leads to time cards, compliance with mine safety and health laws, discrimination, workman's compensation, and everything else employers must put up with, even if you're a ma-and-pa workplace. Granted, it's unlikely your wife would become a whistleblower and get you in trouble, but nowadays you never know. So let this be a warning to the wise. Better cover your butt, because there are severe penalties involved for not complying with alphabet soup government rules. Lots of small-time miners pay their workers a percentage of the gold they recover, but that may or may not be legal depending on how you go about it. Anytime you do this without perfect paperwork, employees can file claims for injuries and overtime, let alone whatever else they dream up. As a past employer of a couple dozen people in my airplane and helicopter dealership, I can absolutely, positively assure you that the state and federal watchdogs will come after you like New York mobsters, unless you can prove you're as pure as the driven snow. Their attitude is you just might as well go ahead and kill yourself. There's no innocence until proven guilty with these government miscreants, so don't take any chances. Talk to your accountant, then your lawyer, and get all your ducks in a row, which will probably mean making your workers limited partners of some sort through the use of bulletproof business agreements. In addition, make doubly sure your workers can actually live and work in isolation without turning on you like wounded animals. Talk is cheap, but real-life wilderness living is way different than most people think. You only have to mention Alaska gold mining and guys pop out of the woodwork and want to come along, with most saying, "Wow, I'll work for nothing and cook and clean and do whatever you need. Boy, would that ever be fun." Except when the bush plane drops them off and disappears over the horizon. They get these funny looks on their faces. Suddenly, they realize there are bears and mosquitoes and no iPhone service, and it's often cold, wet, and windy, and most of all, there ain't no women. Then they find out they're sleeping in sheds or tents, on bad mattresses, and the food's not so good. Pretty soon you have a couple of serial troublemakers on your hands. And now what do? Better choose your help carefully. My ex-sister-in-law says it best. If it has balls or wheels, you're gonna have trouble with it. Well, nothing has more balls and wheels than an Alaskan gold mine, so plan accordingly. And as I've indicated, I'm a long-time Alaskan who sold bush planes and helicopters all over the state. My dealership sold more than 1,000 of them, and almost all are still flying. The key to my success was specializing in low time, like new aircraft, and then welcoming my customers to inspect them in any way they wanted. I didn't care if they brought their own mechanics for a nitpicky inspection, and I was always happy to take them on a test flight. I took pride in what I was selling and saw no reason to lie about anything. I wanted them happy, prosperous, and successful in their purchase from me, which leads to the point I'm trying really hard to make. Walk away from the deal if the people you are buying a gold mine from aren't every bit as cooperative as I was. You must go on high alert if they don't want you to check their drill logs, test drill yourself, and see their financial records, which must prove it's a money-making mine. Move on to the next deal if there's the least hiccup and they're unwilling to fix it. It's your money, and you have every right to protect it. Chapter 6. The Megamine. $522,750,000. That's the value of the gold recovered at the Fort Knox gold mine in 2016. Over $500 million, and that's been taking place more or less since it was opened in 1998 by the Kinross Gold Corporation, a New York Stock Exchange company. It costs about $700 an ounce to produce this gold, for the total of $287 million, with a big chunk of that going for the payroll of 650 people, who mostly live in the Fairbanks area. That leaves a difference of $235,750,000. Wouldn't it be fun to own something like that? How'd it go at work today, honey? The wife asks when you get home. Oh, okay. We made a little money again. What's for dinner, you answer. God, I can't imagine what it would be like. The Pogo Mine, owned by Sumitomo Metal Mining Pogo LLC of Japan, is Alaska's second largest mine. It's located 38 miles northeast of Delta Junction and uses carbon in pulp, cyanide leaching, electrowinning, and sluicing to recover gold embedded in quartz veins. There are about 100 miles of underground roads, 1,000 feet deep, that loop back and forth in rich ore bodies that let 320 employees recover 1,000 ounces a day. The entire operation is an astounding, ultra-modern mine in the last place anyone would expect to find gold running a half ounce per ton of rock. That's as good as it gets. There are two additional underground mines, the Greens Creek Mine and the Kensington Gold Mine, which combined produce almost 200,000 ounces of gold each year in the Juneau area. Greens Creek is really unique because its yearly gold production of 54,000 ounces is an insignificant byproduct of 20,000 tons of lead, 60,000 tons of zinc, and 8 million ounces of silver, making it a world-class, top 10 silver producer. Who would have ever thought that gold could be some kind of annoying sideline? Donlin Gold is a supersized development in western Alaska that envisions open-pit mining of what's clearly one of the largest known gold deposits on Earth. Reserves are in excess of 33 million ounces and will mean jobs for Native Alaskans where none have ever existed before. It will take thousands of people to just build the place since there's no modern infrastructure nearby. No airports, no housing, no power plants, no nothing. Everything must start from zero because the huge ore body sits under a total wilderness. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your eco-politics, this mine will be brought into full production, whether you like it or not. Powerful native Alaska corporations, the Calista and the Kuskokwim, own the land, and it's believed More than 1.3 million ounces of gold a year can be produced by 1,400 workers, who will be the Athabascans and Inuit to the fullest extent possible. This project is very important to the poorest part of the state, so any troublemakers will be told to sit down and shut up, or get arrested for trespassing on native lands. Then there is the Pebble Mine, or maybe I should say pipe dream, since it's anything but a sure thing. It's said to be the largest copper and gold deposit in the world, but it's caused such a national uproar the environmentalists have brought out all their big guns and shut things down, at least for the time being. It's the very first proposed mine ever to be shit-canned by the EPA before its owners even made an application for approval. That's pretty interesting in itself, but instantly proved whose side the Obama administration was on, which resulted in a heavy-duty lawsuit for dirty politics and double standards. Think Donlin. Then to thicken the plot, Anglo American, one of the world's largest mining companies, opted out of its share of the deal, and it walked away from almost $600 million in the 6 years it had put in the project. Ouch! Enter the Trump administration. Now the EPA and Pebble people have sat down together and agreed to settle their differences out of court, if at all possible. But in any case, Pebble can submit a mining application like everybody else has been able to do in the past. There were no promises made, other than the EPA would return to its due process procedures and there wouldn't be any more funny business behind closed doors. Or so we can hope. Regardless, the environmentalists are still going apoplectic, and Lord knows how it will all end. What's in play are more than 100 million ounces of gold, 500 million ounces of silver, 80 billion, yes, with a B, pounds of copper, and several million pounds of molybdenum. Now you can see why I say Alaska is made of gold. There's another big-time gold project 70 miles north of Fairbanks called the Money Knob, which is near Livingood, an area that placer miners have worked for over 100 years. International Tower Hill Mines from Vancouver, Canada, has found the secret motherlode everyone has been looking for, to the tune of more than 20 million ounces, making it one of the world's largest discoveries in 20 years. Once again, this will be a mine that will employ 300 or 400 people once the decade-old project gets approved by the people who already have the high-paying jobs. Oops, I didn't mean to get snotty about all the time it's taking to get this thing off the ground. In the last few paragraphs, the purpose for outlining Alaska's biggest mines is straightforward. You must go where the gold is if you want the best shot at mining, even if it's a mini-mine. It's just that simple. No other state even comes close in known reserves. And then you should understand, most of the so-called last frontier is unexplored. I can think of a million places where I've looked down when I was flying and realized humans had never figured out how to get there. And how could they? Distant green valleys surrounded by snow-capped peaks? Sans using a helicopter, there was no way for anyone to travel that far, let alone climb over the mountains, and it's only been in recent times that helicopters have gotten enough power and speed so they can make it, and then they must hopscotch cross-country by using fuel caches. Most people just can't comprehend how really big Alaska is. It's the size of California, Montana, and Texas combined. And then to make matters worse, it's 1,420 miles by 2,500 miles crosswise when you start traveling between its diagonal points. Think baby flea on an old bull elephant to visualize the problem. Chapter 7. The Golden Fleece. Years ago, an Anchorage friend of mine hunted Dall sheep in the Alaskan range south of Denali, the highest mountain in North America. After flying in and hunting a few days, he shot a really nice ram, which he caped out so it could be added to his trophy collection. He dropped off the hide and horns at his taxidermist and went about his business when he got home. He had no clue he was in for a big surprise. It takes several months to complete an animal mount, since the first step is to ship the hide to a professional tanner who gets it ready to be stretched over a lifelike form. Afterward, the horns are added and the facial features painted so everything looks real. Early in this process, my friend got an amazing phone call that said, "Hey, your ram's hair is full of gold and it's all over the bottom of our wash tub." He almost fell over, but nothing could be done because it was midwinter and impossible to fly back to where he'd been hunting. He told a few friends about it, but kept the location secret. The following summer, he got together with another friend of mine who owned a MD-500E helicopter, and off they went to find the Golden Fleece, just like in Greek mythology. Sadly, Jason and the Argonauts flew back empty-handed late that same day, having failed to figure out where the big ram had been bedding down. I wasn't surprised, because they were looking for the proverbial needle in the haystack 10 times over, since doll rams like the highest peaks they could find that lets them see for miles. I wouldn't even try solving the puzzle without spending at least a couple of weeks searching for the magic spot. The key to it would be finding where the big rams are still bedding down by using a spotting scope, since they always use the same places generation after generation. In any event, the Golden Fleece really exists, but it's in Alaska, not Greece. What most folks don't know is the Golden Fleece myth got started way before the Greeks. Early humans, even when they were still wandering around in animal skins, somehow discovered gold, and it's been a hot commodity ever since. They learned it's beautiful, non-corrosive, and can be easily made into jewelry that all the best women really like. It saved big on raiding distant enemy villages and dragging them home by their long hair. Plus, it was lots more romantic and politically correct. And who said guys aren't smart? Anyway, how to recover gold in large quantities became the next problem, especially since coarse gold and nuggets are so hard to find. Primitive man, or maybe I should say women, found fine gold in their raw furs when they were soaking them prior to tanning. Smart as they were, it didn't take them long to start anchoring sheepskins in rivers where they thought there was fine gold flowing downstream. And sure enough, all the flakes stuck to the hair. They would rinse out the gold just like we do now with miner's moss and return the skins to the river. Written history has this happening back in 1200 BC, so there's little doubt it was taking place even before then. But in any case, that's how the fleece story was born. I'm interested in this mythology, and because my mini-mine sits beside a river that's famous for fine gold, not to mention an early 1900s newspaper report about the discovery of diamonds, I bought a sheepskin and plan on putting this old mining method to test. I'm thinking about a rebar frame for the skin, so it will stay on the bottom, then letting it set for 1 day, 2 days, and so on, until I learn just how well this ancient ingenuity works. I'm looking forward to a pleasant surprise, especially since I've built prehistoric Native American tools and weapons and have been amazed at the engineering that went into them. Ancient people were a lot smarter than we think. Google Antikythera mechanism if you doubt me, because you'll be in for a shocker. I have another true story to tell, but this one is about a century-old mining map. My wife grew up near Albany, Minnesota, which is one of the towns that inspired Garrison Keillor's A Prairie Home Companion and Lake Wobegon, a place where all the women are strong, all the men are good-looking, and all the children are above average. Actually, because I know the area pretty well, Albany is a lot more like the infamous poker player Amarillo Slim joked on the Johnny Carson show. The population never gets any bigger because some guy gets run out of town every time a baby is born. But Flying Wild Alaska's TV star, Ariel Tweedo, said something on the Late Late Show that sheds even better light on Wobegon. "You know we're all related," she answered, when she was asked about Unalakleet, her native Alaskan village of 700, which set off endless laughter. By now, you should have the picture. Wellenstein is an old family name in Albany, and in the 1950s, a son nicknamed Wally moved to Alaska, where he became a successful Anchorage architect who had designed several important buildings in the state. He was an all-around good guy and popular elder statesman. And when my wife got in touch after we moved to town, he became a friend. We often met for dinner and cocktails. Always generous, he told us to use his Alaskan ski resort condominium in Girdwood, since he rarely spent time there. We took him up on the invitation, and I'll never forget when I walked in the door for the first time. Here was a big 100-year-old map of the Kenai Mining District and Moose Pass regions hanging on a wall. It showed pioneer cabin locations, foot trails, military and wagon roads, old Russian diggings, placer mines, placer prospects, quartz locations, and the Alaskan Northern Railway, which at the time ran from the Seward Seaport to the far tidewater of Turnagain Arm, east of Anchorage. I knew enough about Alaska Territory history to date the map at 1910-ish, and it didn't take me long to ask Wally's permission to get a copy made, which I still have. My Alaskan gold map led to two more stories about secret treasures, and oddly enough, both took place on a sheep hunt as well. The season always begins on August 10th, and this is typically when week-long rains start, which often turns to snow in the mountains since autumn is setting in. And just so people get a clear picture, when they ask about sheep hunting, I always tell them to put on their rain gear, run their showers on cold, and live there for a week. What I'm getting at is you usually have plenty of time to talk because you're stuck in a tent or beside a smoky campfire, and gold is always a popular topic. An employee of mine and I flew my Cessna 185 floatplane to Rock Lake in the Wrangell Mountains on a sheep hunt in the mid-1990s. We chased around some nice rams, and I shot the biggest one. Then bad weather set in, and so we were grounded for a couple of days. I told him about my Kenai mining map, and that started a long conversation about gold and where to find it. He had grown up in Alaska and knew a lot about the subject because his father had been a lifelong professional bush pilot who had regularly flown miners and prospectors around southwest Alaska. Finally, he told me about a walnut-sized nugget he dug up along the Willow River, which runs from Hatcher Pass north of Wasilla to the roadside community of Willow on the Parks Highway. This area is the third biggest gold-producing district in the state, starting in 1906, with the total of 624,000 ounces from both hard rock and placer mines. It's still a popular place for hobby mining. There's even an LLC company that is hunting for the hidden glory hole. It's pretty hard to find a better place to spend time off with your dredge, high banker, or metal detector, especially since it's not that far from Anchorage, Palmer, and Wasilla. Of course, I wanted to know exactly where he'd found it, since I flew helicopters and wanted to go there, and nuggets that big are almost impossible to find. The same conversation then turned into one about Dick Prenneke, the guy shown on public television's Alone in the Wilderness documentaries, which were made from film he'd taken himself. I had never met him, but I knew lots about him because of my longtime friendships with the Ellsworth boys. Wayne, also known as B, John and Glenn, who were all my age. Their father was the legendary pioneer bush pilot Leon "Babe" Ellsworth, one of the very few who hadn't crashed and killed himself, and who had founded the frontier settlement of Port Ellsworth in 1950, which is now headquarters of the Lake Clark National Park and Preserve. The Ellsworths and Prenneke were like the founding fathers of Alaska, especially prior to statehood in 1959, and all were like gods to me, especially when it comes to bush flying and wilderness life. For example, B and his brothers were flying mail with their dad in a T-craft when they were only 11 or 12 years old, since that's how important the family was to the Iliamna and Lake Clark area of the state. Prenneke was a young Iowan who had relocated to Alaska in 1950 after serving in World War II. He was both a Navy wartime carpenter and a professional diesel mechanic who quickly found work at the Naval Air Station on Kodiak Island, and then with the Fish and Wildlife Service in King Salmon. His reputation for being a hard-working and excellent heavy equipment operator soon spread, and he was never without people wanting to hire him. By 1967, he had saved enough money to retire and asked Babe Ellsworth to fly him to Twin Lakes, which is about as far as you can get from civilization. He built a log cabin and lived there by himself for over 30 years, all the while filming and writing wonderful stories about Alaskan wildlife, mountain scenery, and self-dependence. Understandably, he couldn't have done that without the Ellsworths flying in and out of Twin Lakes with basic supplies and mail, so that explains my knowing so much about him. Plus, I'd read the book and watched the PBS documentary about him a couple of times. They were really interesting to me, since they somewhat characterize the time I've spent all alone at my mini-mine. There is a 16mm film of Prenicky hiking with a big gold pan tied onto his backpack, and then a later movie clip of him panning for gold and finding what's commonly called pickers. But where he did this is a mystery. It's well known that he would take off cross-country and hike 35 miles in a single day to see friends at their Bonanza Hills placer mine. And he'd help out by panning down concentrate for them. But the film of him finding gold doesn't look right for an active claim. It looks like he's panning in a mountain stream. But there are about 1 million of those within spitting distance of Twin Lakes. So which one? On top of that, everything is locked up in a national park and preserve where you can't mine anyway. Doesn't mean you can't sneak in and look for gold on the sly. And it's unlikely the Park Service would ever catch you in a 4-million-acre wilderness, but it's a situation like the Lost Dutchman's Mine in the Superstition Mountains east of Phoenix, Arizona. To this day, people are madly searching for the legendary missing mine, and 5 have died just since 2009, all suffering horrible, torturous deaths from heat stroke, while ignoring the fact the superstitions are protected and you couldn't mine there even if you somehow found the hidden motherlode. It wouldn't be much different at Twin Lakes, since you have to keep everything top secret or face big trouble if you were caught bootlegging gold. Regardless, all this makes for great campfire conversations. My next story is about a Fairbanks airplane customer whom I would visit whenever I flew into town. He lived with a lady who owned a successful midtown pawn shop, and he helped her run the place. Both were smart people who ran a busy store, and they always had the usual stuff you'd see in any Alaskan pawn shop, everything from gold jewelry and natural nuggets to guitars and hunting rifles. You name it, and they had it. On one visit, some good-sized nuggets caught my eye, and I asked about them. And here's what I was told. And please remember, nice nuggets are really rare, to the point where it's easier to find a 5-carat diamond than a 1-ounce nugget. So that's why these quickly caught my attention. An old-timer who lived in a log cabin on the Middle Fork Chandalar River used to come into Fairbanks once a year and sell them as nuggets so he could resupply and go back home. He'd do it in the wintertime, after snowshoeing cross-country to Bettles with his dog. Then he'd get flown into Fairbanks and back home again. He had done this for a long time, and both parties had learned to trust each other. But during one winter, he didn't show up at their pawn shop. They worried about him, but there was nothing they could do. There are still old guys who live by themselves in the middle of nowhere, and they don't want people bothering them. Other than when they're buying supplies, they want to be left alone. And they certainly don't want anyone knowing where they're living and what they're doing, especially if it's someone from the government. Anyway, my friend forgot about him and went on with his life. Later that winter, a Bettles bush pilot was flying his ski plane on a trip over Chandalar country and happened to see something that looked like a wolf feeding on an animal kill in the middle of a snow-covered lake. It instantly got his interest, because wolves take off like a shot when they hear an airplane, as they get hunted from the air. But this one didn't run. It stayed put. He circled, landed, and taxied up to what he could now see was a dog chained to something it had been feeding on. It didn't take him long to figure out what it was: the dog's owner. He promptly got airborne again and radioed the state troopers to come take care of some very ugly business. My Fairbanks friend and I would sometimes talk about flying up to the Middle Fork, Chandeleur River, and go hunting for the old-timers' cabin. We had a pretty good idea of its location from what had been said through the years, but the whereabouts of his nugget mine was a total mystery. Logically, it would only be a couple 3 miles from the cabin, and once you found the rotting structure, you might find the mine. The smart thing would be to raft the whole river and survey both shorelines as you float along, looking for clearings with clumps of pioneer plants, old wood piles, shoreline landscapes that just don't look right, and tree stumps. Even if you crap out on finding it, the whole river runs through good gold country, so you would be continually prospecting its tributaries in any event. Unfortunately, my days of summer-long adventures are past, so you go do it. My last story tells about how heartbreaking life can be, and it has always made me really wonder why some families have this black cloud hanging over their heads that just won't go away, no matter how blameless they are. In this particular case, we will go all the way back to the beginnings of Alaska's 1898 gold rush, which once again actually got started in Dawson City, Canada. Mark it up to most folks not being very good at geography back then. Hard to think in this day and age of computers, Google Earth, and GPS, there was a time not much more than 100 years ago where 100,000 otherwise normal, everyday people would drop everything they were doing and take off for Alaska, only to eventually learn their destination was actually in Canada. Some didn't even catch on until they bumped into red-coated Mounties standing under a Canadian flag, because that's how dumb they were. A fellow named Martin Slisco was one of these stampeders, though I'm not suggesting that he was dumb, since he was far from it. Whether he had first traveled to Dawson City and Nome and found out those places played out and kept going, I don't know. But it's historical fact that he was one of the first to settle in Wiseman, Alaska, where a few really rich claims had been discovered. One produced a 137-ounce nugget, so this was as good as it gets, and methinks I would have stopped there as well. In any event, it's known that he owned the Wiseman Roadhouse, a small log cabin on a bunch of claims a few miles outside of town, and was an eyewitness in 1925 when Noel Wien, Alaska's most famous pioneer bush pilot, landed his Hisso standard biplane north of the Arctic Circle for the first time, which made history for both him and Wiseman. It's pretty hard to argue with Slisco's eminence as a true Alaskan frontiersman, or what was called a sourdough back in the day, because credentials don't come any better. In 1937, Slisco traveled to Croatia and married a young woman named Pira Kira, who later boarded an ocean liner and sailed to New York by herself, then took a train to finally meet up with her new husband and make that last part of the long trip to Wiseman. Talk about culture shock. This one would be hard to beat, but she quickly adjusted to bush life, and by 1941, Martin and she had 3 children, Andrew, Donna, and Martin Jr., or Marty as he was popularly known. Then in September 1942, Martin Slisco was murdered with a shotgun blast at point-blank range by Jack Welsh, a drunken bum who kept hanging around the roadhouse. He ran away, but was soon caught, held captive for 2 weeks, and then transported to Fairbanks for prosecution and imprisonment. Pear was now left in an almost impossible situation, with a business she couldn't run by herself, especially with 3 little kids and several undeveloped gold claims she knew little about. She was in a big pickle, as they say. But then friends rallied around her and helped her buy a home in Fairbanks, where she got a job in a jewelry store and eventually remarried. To her credit, she insisted that her children educate themselves, and so they did, with Marty, the youngest, becoming a wealthy Anchorage dentist who owned $1 million home on a suburban seaplane lake, half of a busy downtown bar, and a beautiful fishing lodge on a Lake Clark Island, which is probably as close to heaven as you can get. The guy had lots of horsepower, though don't mistake that he wasn't a nice person, because he was, and he flew float planes, which explains why he and I got to be friends. His wife's name was Jane, who later became a friend as well.
Marty needed a second de Havilland beaver on floats for his fishing lodge. And since I just bought a really nice one in Vancouver, Canada for resale, he immediately bought it for me. And he liked it so much that he had the first one that he owned painted to match it. Our lives moved on, at least until Friday, May 20th, 1988, a day I'll never forget. I was driving around Anchorage that day, running errands and enjoying a perfect spring day. Suddenly, radio news broke that Marty had just been killed in a float plane crash at Lake Hood, where I owned a hangar and ran my aircraft dealership. I quickly drove out to see the wreck and was sickened to find what I initially thought was the beaver I'd sold to him all smashed and burned beyond recognition. Clearly, the plane had come straight down at full power, and it was so mangled I couldn't even read its license number.
It wasn't bad enough to lose a friend, but now I had to worry about upcoming FAA and NTSB investigations, megabuck lawsuits, and regardless of the facts that I'd somehow sold him a defective airplane, I was sick with grief and fear. But thankfully, was told right away it wasn't the plane I'd sold him, but the one that he bought from somebody else.
For those who are wondering, he had just picked it up after an annual inspection, and the controls had been hooked up backwards. Always a death sentence when you take off. I've only known one pilot in my life who figured out what was wrong quickly enough to save his own life. And even then he damaged a wing. It would be like driving a car at 100 miles per hour with the steering wheel working the wrong way. Crash, bang, and you're dead.
A couple of years later, my wife became good friends with Marty's wife, Jane, and the three of us would have dinner together now and then. Then she remarried, and we still did things with her and her new husband. One day, we all decided to go to Wiseman and look for the old Slisco cabin, which Marty had told Jane had the letters SLISCO cut out of tin cans and tacked onto the door, or so his mother had said. We drove up the Hall Road north of Fairbanks to find it. What a great trip. And find it we did, though it turned into a pretty emotional event. But it all turned out okay because Jane finally got closure on her terrible loss and focused on the future. We spent the night in Wiseman at a rustic bed and breakfast, and I'll never forget the date because I'd forgotten it was my birthday when we got up in the morning. Everyone sang happy birthday to me and gave me a homemade cupcake with one little candle stuck in it, while we drank our coffee and ate pancakes. A meager party, to say the least, but fun nonetheless. Afterward, we set off to find the Slisco cabin and gold claims. The locals, of course, knew the name really well and had a rough idea about where we should look. However, they warned us that we'd have to cross an active mining operation where two brothers with heavy equipment would be going full speed. These guys had mined around Wiseman for years, and like most gold miners, weren't particularly welcoming to strangers showing up unannounced, or even announced for that matter. Let the women get out of the car first, we were told. Okay, roger that, I thought in pilot talk. Sounds good to me. Sure enough, we didn't drive far on a rough dirt road about 5 miles north of town before running into two guys working like madmen, one with a front-end loader and the other with an excavator, feeding a wash plant as fast as it could go. At first glance, I knew these fellows knew what they were doing and had it down to a science. We parked, Jane jumped out and marched right up to them. Both stopped what they were doing, but didn't look happy at all about being interrupted by some skinny woman walking up to where she could get run over. She immediately told them that she was Martin Slisco's daughter-in-law, and that did the trick. I was proud of her, and both brothers climbed down from their equipment and couldn't have been nicer. Martin Slisco was like a god to them. They didn't know where the cabin was, but come to find out they had mined all the old Slisco claims after Marty and Jane had let them go back to the state, several years before his death. He had grown tired of renewing the paperwork. Gold was down, and he knew that he would never mine there himself, so he just gave them up. The brothers wouldn't say how many ounces they'd found, but they did tell Jane it had been some of the best ground they'd ever worked.
Then they said something that really got my attention. We should have gone over those claims with a detector because there were so many good nuggets, but we never get time to do stuff like that because the season's so short up here. Must have been more down in the bedrock. I've forever regretted not going back with a super-duper gold detector, which is why I'm telling you this last, very long golden fleece story. Maybe you can do it. We drove to the claims, got out, and looked around. Surface reclamation had been completed, and the whole area was mostly level, with brush and fireweeds growing back. Jane and her husband, along with my wife, are almost useless anywhere they can't get a pizza delivered. So I was on my own. I strapped on my Ruger 44 mag revolver, because this is tundra grizzly country, a subspecies that's known to hunt humans, and set off for what looked to me like the only sensible place to build a cabin, a small spruce-covered hill that had an all-around view of everything. I hiked about a quarter mile, climbed a short ways, and bingo, there it was, hidden in the trees. More than half of it was collapsed with not much left of the roof. But there was the door, just like Marty's mother had said. It was angled over and forced out of its frame, and the whipsawed boards were weathered dark brown, but the Slisco letters were plain as day. It was like stepping back in history. Jane had trailed behind me a ways, with her husband and my wife following even farther back. I yelled for Jane to come up the hill, which she did. She walked to a few feet of the door, stood there for a second, then clapped her hands over her mouth and cheeks and completely broke down. I had never seen anyone cry so hard, and I stood there stunned for a moment, then ran back down the hill and told her husband to go help his wife. He figured it out in a split second and took off on the run because he saw that I had tears in my own eyes. Pretty hard not to be affected by an emotional scene like that, leastwise for me. 15 or so minutes later, Jane and her husband came down from the cabin, and she looked pretty distraught. But by then I had made up my mind. I felt like I needed to be careful on how I said things, but I didn't want to leave without what I thought was a unique artifact. "Hey, Jane," I said when her and her husband got close enough, "we need to take that door for your grandkids, and somebody will steal it if we don't, then it will be lost to your family. It's a really important part of Alaska's history and needs to be put in a museum." She blinked back what was left of her tears, but didn't look convinced. Fortunately, her husband, who was a retired Air Force officer and worked as a military historian, immediately sided with me, which I had guessed would happen. He and I climbed back up the hill, and since I don't even walk around downtown Anchorage without my trusty pocket multi-tool knife, we soon had it off its hinges and came back down carrying the door. It was a lot heavier than I thought, but by taking turns, we got it to our car and tied it on the roof rack. To this day, I'm glad I insisted on taking it, although I don't know what happened to the door in the end. The black cloud hanging over the Sliscos never went away, and Jane died of colon cancer a couple years later. Chapter 8. Have Gun, Will Travel. I mentioned the Haul Road a few paragraphs back. However, its formal name is the Dalton Highway when you're talking with the powers that be. It runs from Livingood, which is a whistle-stop settlement 84 miles north of Fairbanks on the Elliott Highway, to Dead Horse, 414 miles north. But think of it this way. You can take one of the greatest adventures known to mankind by driving 500 miles all the way to the Arctic Ocean, and the reason it's popularly known as the Haul Road is because there are about 1 million 18-wheelers driving it every year. Actually, it's about 200 big rigs a day hauling equipment and supplies from Fairbanks to Purdue Bay, which is the humongous oil field located on the North Slope, the tundra country that gently slopes from the Brooks Range to the coastal plain alongside the Arctic Ocean. And you will be continually reminded what this road is all about by the ever-present Alaskan Pipeline, the 800-mile engineering monstrosity that was built between 1974 and 1977.
Seeing this is almost worth the trip by itself, and it's hard to believe workaday men and women could have built it in the most forbidding environment on Earth in such a short time. I had the wonderful experience of flying airplanes and helicopters all over Alaska, Canada, and the high Arctic, starting not long after graduating from high school. After trying a couple of quarters of college, my future became a no-brainer for me. I begged, borrowed, and stole, not really, the money it took to get licensed as a professional pilot for single and multi-engine airplanes, helicopters, and floatplanes. Then, as luck would have it, I started my own aircraft dealership when I was 26 years old and specialized in Alaska bush planes and floatplanes, which let me fly from the Aleutian Islands to St. Lawrence Island and from Bethel to Arctic Village in the Brooks Range. And I've flown back and forth across Canada way too many times to count. Then all over the high Arctic to places like Churchill, Rankin Inlet, and York Factory, which are all along Hudson Bay. I used to gas up my floatplane at Baker Lake and fly to Chantry Inlet in the Phelan River over what's called the Barren Grounds. I've seen and done so many exciting things I can't remember them all. But oddly enough, one of my best adventures was driving the haul road. I often describe it like traveling through the Serengeti Plain in Africa because I saw so many animals: caribou, Dall sheep, grizzlies, moose, muskox, wolves, and more were standing alongside the road. It was truly an awesome trip. The big thing that struck me when I drove it was, where was this road when I was young and fancy-free? Of course, it didn't exist back then. But it's a good thing that it didn't, because I would have surely spent my summers living off the land and looking for gold, especially in the Brooks Range. Here's a road where you can drive your old beater, park it someplace, and explore and prospect to your heart's content. The only catch is you better know what you're doing or you're dead. This is as dangerous and raw as any wilderness gets, which is why I wrote the chapter title, Have Gun, Will Travel. The 1950s TV show about a gentleman gunslinger dressed all in black who rode the Old West, rescuing beautiful women and country folks from bad guys with evil thoughts in mind. Well, there aren't too many bad guys in the high Arctic, but there are lots of things just as deadly, like bugs so bad you can't breathe, grizzlies, horizontal rain and snow, hypothermic temperatures, warp speed winds, and wolf packs. Don't go if you're a professional crybaby or aren't tough, because you won't survive. As for the gun part of the title, I don't mean handgun, not even the .454 Cansol, mostly because I've never met anyone who could even hit the side of a red barn with one. So what good is it? Stick to a rifle, with my favorite caliber being the .30-06, because it's easy to find ammunition for it even in remote areas. This cartridge, especially with 200-grain bullets, has been proven countless times that it's more than adequate for use on bad-tempered big animals, so it's always been my weapon of choice. I never leave home for bear country without my Remington Model 7400 semi-automatic carbine, sighted in for dead on at 50 yards. And I practice with it, taking it into mind that its safety must be snapped off, its buttstock brought up to my shoulder, and its iron sights lined up on a target in just 2 or 3 seconds. I've had the best-selling bear safety book, Fighting for Your Life, Man-Eating Bears, available on Amazon Kindle books and at bookstores for years. Buy it, read it, and pay attention to what I'm telling you about bears. The life you save may be your own. The big hiccup to gold prospecting along the Haul Road is that Alaska is made up of a huge mishmash of federal, Native Alaskan, and state land, and so it becomes a real conundrum as whether or not you can legally stake any claims, let alone start mining. Fortunately, we have GPS and Google Map nowadays, along with the Department of Natural Resources Alaska Mapper to help out. So once you find your location with a GPS, then it's pretty easy for the Division of Mining, Land and Water in Anchorage, or Fairbanks, to identify who owns the land. But at first, don't worry about it, because you're out in the hinterlands, and chances of you getting caught doing something wrong are slim to none. Pan, use a metal detector or a portable sluice and pocket all the gold you can find, remembering it's a situation a bit like the 3S mantra: shoot, shovel, and shut up, that Montana cattle ranchers sometimes use to solve grizzly and wolf problems. Find the gold first and worry about all the small stuff later when you get back into town. Fairbanks, Living Good, and Wiseman have produced significant quantities of gold for over 100 years. And there are placer mines in operation yet today. I'm convinced a guy can still discover good ground around these places, but only if you can hike long distances and live out of a backpack. My hero in this respect is a Canadian named Sean Ryan, who has become famous in recent years for discovering gold in the Yukon Territory. He got his start, believe it or not, by living in a shack on the outskirts of Dawson City with his wife and 2 kids and hunting mushrooms because he was so desperately broke. Google him, read about him, and copy his tactics. The guy is now a multi-millionaire, owns his own helicopter, and has perfected a hit-and-run, low-footprint style of prospecting that has taken Canada by storm. The same thing needs to happen to Alaska. Somewhat like Sean, I've always dreamed of owning a camper rig that has a Robinson R-22 helicopter in an enclosed trailer towing behind it. I would have a fuel tank and everything I need once I found a place to park for a few days. A good used R-22 helicopter can be bought for plus or minus $125,000, and it will be pretty much bulletproof afterward. Fly it 100 hours, pull an inspection, which isn't expensive or even required but once a year, and then you're good to go again. Flight schools use them to train any and every idiot student pilot that comes in to learn how to fly, and the hell gets beat out of them on every training flight, but they just keep on trucking. This little chopper is perfect for a one-man prospecting outfit, especially nowadays with everything being computerized, digitalized, and run by GPS satellites. It doesn't burn much gas, cruises cross-country at 100 miles per hour plus, and can land almost anywhere that's flat. I'm convinced a smart prospector could hit the jackpot in Alaska with this setup, so maybe it could be you. There's only one little wrinkle in my dream, which is helicopters can't be landed in national parks, national forests, monuments, etc., which drives pilots nuts, because it's so hard to know where the boundaries are truly located, as you see them shown on sectional aeronautical charts. Think pilot maps. Let's just say my solution to the problem was I never landed without throwing an oily rag and a wrench on the ground. Sorry, sir, but a warning light flashed and the FAA requires that I land immediately and check out what's wrong. The engine and gearboxes were so hot, I couldn't work on them right away. So I've just been wandering around waiting for things to cool off so I don't burn myself. If any law enforcement officer argues with you after being told this, then the very last thing you say is, "I feared for my life and I want an attorney." And nowadays, of course, you should be recording all this on your iPhone. I'm pretty sure that will end everything right then and there, and you can go about your business. But whatever you do, don't start running at the mouth or arguing about anything. Be nice and polite, but keep your mouth shut and don't incriminate yourself. Actually, this is exactly the way you should behave anytime law enforcement stops you for whatever reason. Never, never dig your own grave by answering questions. Your response should always be, "Sir, may I have your card so I can have my attorney call you?" Never forget this advice if you know what's good for you. Oh, and by the way, make sure a trusted family member files a lien on your helicopter at the FAA Aircraft Registry Office in Oklahoma City. The feds and the state of Alaska love nothing better than using whatever excuse they can come up with to seize your aircraft, impound it, and bankrupt you with their ransom demands, just like in kidnapping cases. It's funny how things get fixed lots faster when someone steps forward and says, "Hey, I have a lien on that, and I need to get paid, or my property given back to me right away." My second big-time road adventure was my long drive to Dawson City, the epicenter of the Klondike Gold Rush in the Yukon Territory. I look at this trip the same as a pilgrimage to the Holy City. You don't have real spiritual faith until you do it. The same philosophy applies to gold miners and prospectors, because you don't deserve to discover any gold until you visit Dawson City. More important, it's fun as hell, not to mention educational and interesting. The town hasn't changed all that much since 1898, so you get a real sense of the excitement back then. Even the town's buildings are still standing, so it's like going back in time. You start this trip by driving to Edmonton, Canada, by whatever highways you like best across the lower 48 in Canada. Then it's Highway 2, north to Dawson Creek, the start of the Alaskan Highway. You will begin to see the countryside change to mostly forest lands, so expect to see traffic made up of logging trucks and oil field vehicles. This part of Canada is rich in natural resources, and its people are always busy making a living. Along the way is Grand Prairie, the last large town before you get into real backcountry driving. But don't worry about anything, because the roads are good with lots of places to pull over and stay overnight. Upon reaching Dawson Creek, you will find it's a classic small town surrounded by farmland. Stop, gas up, and get ready for an adventure of a lifetime. Once you start up the Alaskan Highway, it's take your pick on the outdoor activities you want to enjoy. Camping, fishing, gold panning, hiking, wildlife photography, you name it, and it's pretty much at your fingertips, or just a short way up the road. For example, Peace Island Park is the home of the world's invitational gold panning championship. So what does that tell you? Fort St. John is a busy town about 50 miles away, and then it's a bit of a long drive through a trundling wilderness and across mighty rivers until you reach Fort Nelson, a dusty frontier town that got its start as a Hudson Bay trading post. All along the way, folks like talking about gold, and so it's easy to get information on what claims might be available and where to pan and prospect. Yes, it's legal for you to buy Canadian claims, and British Columbia and the Yukon are world famous for gold strikes. Driving the Alaskan Highway from Fort Nelson to Watson Lake without a doubt is the best drive in North America, if not the world. Not only is it full of majestic beauty because you're crossing the northern end of the Rocky Mountains, but it's filled with wildlife standing alongside the road. You are flat guaranteed to see black bear, buffalo herds, caribou, deer, elk, grizzlies, moose, mountain goats, stone sheep, and wolves. I've actually been stopped along with other folks by buffalo that think they own the right-of-way. It's amazing, and scary as well, to see big bulls standing in the middle of the road and eyeballing you just in front of your bumper. Not a good time to get antsy, and please remember they hurt more people than bears each year, so don't get out of your car. It doesn't take much for them to get the idea you're some kind of weird-ass predator that needs to be gored to death, which might even include your car, just for spite. Toad River, Muncho Lake, and the Liard River are optional stops along the way, with each being worthwhile. Toad is a small roadside lodge where you can buy gas, eat and stay overnight, whether you're driving a car, a motorhome, or something larger. Locals take their coffee breaks here. The food is always good, and it's a nice rest stop on a long stretch of mountain driving where you must stay alert. Afterward, Muncho is an amazing blue-green lake with breathtaking scenery, wildlife running around like farm animals, and endless places to go camping, fishing, and hiking. This is your journey's end if you want to disappear for a summer with your backpack and gold pan. But be forewarned, you're on your own once you leave the road, and Canada probably won't waste any time looking for you, since wildernesses don't come any bigger, more dangerous, and rugged than this one. Our friendly northern neighbor will just assume another dumb American got turned into bear poop, and that will be the end of it.
After Muncho Lake, the Alaskan Highway flattens into long stretches with wide grassy ditches busy with buffalo. Black bear are common sight, and the Liard River Hot Springs Provincial Park is a legendary stop along the way. I always pull over because there are gravel parking areas, porta potties, a restaurant, and places to stay near the entrance. This is big river country, with long steel bridges crossing the Smith and the Cole. And then the awesome Liard River can be viewed at Cranberry Rapids, besides a couple of other places along the road. You will also pass two really nice tourist lodges, which offer all the creature comforts anyone could want. Frankly, I would completely understand it if it took you a week to get to Watson Lake, because that's how wonderful this part of Canada is, and mere words are never good enough to describe it. I have never really liked Watson Lake. Not that there's anything terribly wrong with the town. It's the entry point to the Yukon Territory, and has had the dubious reputation for 60-plus years for being the last place in the world where you want to have car problems. There isn't anywhere else to go. The townspeople know it, and so you may have to take out a second mortgage on your home to escape. But in all fairness, one faces this same issue all along the Alaskan Highway. So don't drive it without a low-mileage, well-maintained vehicle that is really unlikely to cause you problems, and then you won't have to worry about it. Otherwise, Watson Lake is a dusty frontier settlement of 800 that's dependent on tourists for a living, to the point of becoming world famous for its extraordinary signpost forest, which is actually a worthwhile stop, so you can marvel at what must be by now 100,000 road signs that people have carried from all corners of the world and nailed to posts put up for just that purpose. The tradition got started by a lonely American soldier who was working on the Alaskan Highway in 1942, and it hasn't stopped since. It's pretty amazing to read all the unique signs that somehow found their way to northern Canada. Hey, you can steal one from your own hometown and put it up too, so go for it. Watson Lake to Whitehorse is pretty much a 280-mile hook. Think golf, in open valleys between distant mountains. There's nothing much to worry about, and you can hit the gas pedal and go like hell on a highway that's just as good as most in the lower 48. There are still animals to see, but not like the Liard River country. And you can take your choice of about 1,000,000 places to pull over and pee, dump garbage, go fishing, take pictures at the Continental Divide, or whatever else that makes you tingle. 3 hours after leaving Watson Lake, you'll hit Teslin, which is at the end of a long, dizzying bridge crossing Teslin Lake. There's a small store with gas, a nice motel with camper hookups, rooms, and a restaurant, and I always stop and stretch my legs, tell my war stories to other travelers, and start gossiping to locals about gold. One time, I drove out to the nearby airport, parked my travel trailer, and hung around a couple of days. No one bothered me. I chatted up local bush pilots who knew my aircraft dealership's name, and I really enjoyed my time off. It's good to stop and smell the flowers. After Teslin, the Alaskan Highway follows the shoreline of Teslin Lake for a long way, then curves left to Jake's Corner, where you must now take the fork in the road. Joking aside, your choice is to zoom off toward Whitehorse or drive 100 miles to Skagway, Alaska, then loop back to the Alaskan Highway. This roundabout route will let you visit the old jumping-off points of the Klondike Gold Rush, the Chilkoot Trail, and the White Pass, along with other legendary places and things. This part of Canada is still rich in gold. There are active mines, and Atlin in particular is a sublime town where there are usually claims for sale. Whitehorse can just damn well wait while you explore where the greatest gold rush in history got started, since that's how special this side trip is. Don't miss it, and be forewarned, you might not want to leave Atlin, long called the Switzerland of the North. Whitehorse is arguably the focal point of the far north when it comes to gold mining, more so than even Anchorage or Fairbanks, leastways in my mind. From here, you can decide what direction you want to go prospecting and shopping for proven ground. It's a nice town of almost 25,000. Has all the amenities one could wish for, especially if you're a wannabe miner. And its history dates back to day one of the Klondike Gold Rush, which once again was regularly called the Alaskan Gold Rush, because folks knew so little about the two separate territories back then, let alone where the international boundary lay. Hell, America and Canada hadn't even agreed on where to draw the line. Ah, those were the days when you could stake claims, build a log cabin, and neither government could take it away from you, as long as you were willing to back it up with your Winchester.
Your first stop in Whitehorse should be at the airport when you see an old Canadian Pacific Douglas DC-3 mounted on a steel post right beside the Alaskan Highway, which makes it look like it's landing. Park your camper, car, or truck close to it. Take some pictures, and your friends will think it almost crashed into you. It's great for laughs. Plus, then you can walk over to the Yukon Transportation Museum, which will tell you about the territory's wonderful history. It will be time well spent, guaranteed.
Once you've finished your tour, head downtown to the Walmart parking lot, but go early, or else you won't find a parking spot. By cocktail hour, everyone along the Alaskan Highway has made a beeline for the place, and you may be too late, and you don't want to miss this road warrior rendezvous because it's fun as hell. People from all over gather here in the evening. The folding chairs come out, and you will see as many as 20 people sitting in a big circle consuming adult beverages while, excitingly, telling their harrowing tales of surviving the Alaskan Highway, which, truth be told, is no harder than driving across the lower 48. Anyway, camp out here for a couple of days. Stock up at Walmart and Canadian Tire, which is a giant store next door with everything imaginable for sale, and get ready for the trip to Dawson City. Fun will be had by all. It's always smart to spend some time snooping around Whitehorse. Once again, it has a really long association with gold mining. There are lots of interesting things to do and see, and now you've reached true gold country, where mining is a big deal. Begin by asking where you can buy gold pans, metal detectors, and sluice boxes. Then visit those stores, talk with their employees, check out their bulletin boards, and in general play Sherlock Holmes so you get info on what opportunities are available. Ask who wants to sell their claims, who's looking for partners, who's hiring, and where the best ground is, and how do you get there. Be patient. Don't get pushy. And remember that miners who are the real McCoy are always secretive, so don't overdo it. Your goal is to get the big picture, then focus on a target if you get lucky enough to find one. Undoubtedly, you will be told about Dawson City while you're playing detective in Whitehorse. And so get back on the Alaskan Highway after a couple of days, drive about 8 miles north, and turn onto the Klondike Highway. It's a 6-hour trip to Dawson City, or 2-3 days if you take your time. Make the side trip on the Silver Trail to the tiny towns of Keno and Mayo, and make believe that you're making the same trip in horse-drawn sleds and stagecoaches back in 1902. It took 5 days back then, and be forewarned, the subarctic wilderness hasn't changed one bit since. You're in the middle of one of the biggest in the world, and it's utterly colossal in every direction, not to mention dangerous. This is the right place if you want to disappear forever, either by accident or on purpose, and nobody will even know where to start looking for you. Dawson City is a hoot, and there's no other way to describe it. Many of the original buildings are still standing. Lots of them have been fixed up and are still in use, and the town is full of fascinating characters. Tourism plays a big part in the economy, but mining is still paramount because of the nearby rich gold fields. So it's very easy to bump into locals who have come into town for supplies or to simply knock back some beers at Diamond Tooth Gertie's Casino, which is as good as it gets when it comes to searching for lucky breaks. There's nothing like a little booze to loosen lips, so buy people drinks and start visiting. Besides, Gertie's is a lot of fun,
There are blackjack, poker, and roulette tables and 3 raucous can-can shows every night. Surprisingly, especially for this far north, everything is professionally done, yet laid back. So it's easy to fit in and make friends. Who says business and pleasure can't mix? I spent a week hanging around Dawson City and loved every flipping minute of it. Parked my 22-foot trailer just outside of town, drove around in my pickup, visited the old Territorial Administration Building National Historic Site. Clearly a government pencil pusher came up with that name, where I spent pretty much of a whole day looking at relics and reading about the Klondike Gold Strike. Next, I made sure I was at Gertie's early enough for cocktail hour and its nightly poker tournament, where I made the final table because there was only a dozen of us to start the game. We all drank too much, told exaggerated stories, and it didn't take too long before one player pulled out a nickel-sized gold nugget from his pocket. And then the conversation really took off. Maybe I'm goofy, but I had a great time, and it was my kind of fun. The huge gold fields around Dawson City might offer more opportunities for miners than any other place in the world, including Alaska. The Yukon Territory strongly supports mineral development and is more practical on environmental issues, plus you're not having to deal with andromnous waters every time you turn around. Think spawning salmon. There are enough roads so you will probably have access to properties with good potential, versus claims out in the middle of nowhere, which always means building airstrips and chartering expensive cargo planes to haul in your equipment. In addition, Americans are welcomed with open arms. Bottom line, it's really important for any wannabe miner to survey the Klondike for gold claims. No one can argue that Alaska's next-door neighbor has just as much to offer, so make sure you don't miss out on something. Once you're ready to leave Dawson City, your next destination will be the 40-mile country by the way of the Top of the World Highway, rather than backtracking to the Alaskan Highway. Step 1 on this new adventure will be getting in line for the George Black Ferry, which will take you across the mighty Yukon River, the far north's most celebrated waterway. By now, you must have surely seen the old-time paddle wheels on display in Dawson City and Whitehorse, which are archetypical of the steamboats that carried the earliest prospectors to the first interior gold strike in 1886. The frontier boomtown of 40 Mile quickly sprang up just inside the Alaska-Canada border, all because of the rich, coarse gold sandbars in the 40 Mile River. With those good old days in mind, step 2 is driving aboard a huge ferry and getting sandwiched between monster motorhomes just 6 inches away, where you can't even get your door open. The ferry crewmen don't mess around, and they make sure they're jam-packed for the crossing to the other side. The Top of the World Highway isn't meant for speed demons. Not that there's anything terribly wrong with it. Just take your time since it's narrow and steep in places. The shoulders are soft, and there are potholes and washboard all along the way. Actually, I found it a bit of a boring drive, mostly because the road follows the high parts of an endless stretch of low wilderness mountains reaching to all horizons. I can confidently say the Indians, past and present, never explored much of this part of Canada, let alone any palefaces. In less than 70 miles, you will arrive at U.S. Customs at the Poker Creek-Little Gold Creek border crossing. And then you're back in America again. Whoopee! Once you cross the border, the road turns to crap after a few miles of nice asphalt. And then it can only be described as a potholed snake trail, where it's a good place to crash if you aren't careful. Guys in beat-up pickup trucks are coming around blind corners like madmen because the 40 Mile River is a proven dredging area. And everybody's in a big hurry because the gold might run out at any moment. Cheap humor aside, your next stop is Chicken, named by the early prospectors who were amazed at the huge ptarmigan flocks that populated the place. But nobody knew how to spell the word, so Chicken was substituted. This tiny outpost is the epicenter of an active mining district. Plus, it's a mandatory stop for Orville and Myrtle from East Overshoe, Iowa,
so they can take pictures for the folks back home. In any case, it's a pretty interesting place where you can gold pan, visit the old-time Pedro bucket line dredge, and see real log cabins from the frontier days. For an aspiring gold miner like yourself, it's the first place in Alaska where you should seriously start searching for good ground. It's no secret that hard-working guys have dredged 30 ounces of gold from 40 Mile in a single summer, all by themselves, because the riverbed is so rich in places. Time for you to get busy.
From Chicken, it's 66 miles to the Alaskan Highway, where Tok is your next stop after a 12-mile drive. Now you're at Alaska's most important crossroads, where you must decide between Anchorage and Fairbanks. Personally, I would choose the latter, since that gives you the easiest road access to known gold country. I've already mentioned Livingood and Wiseman, which are great places to snoop around like you did in Chicken. In any event, you've probably experienced the greatest adventure of your life, and now all there's to do is strike it rich. Or maybe you already have. Not many people get to do what you've just done by taking a long way around on your have-gun, will-travel journey. Except don't quit now. There's a gold mine out there with your name on it, if you just keep looking. Chapter 9. Pencil Pusher Paperwork. You really didn't think you could buy an Alaskan gold mine and run it without any red tape, did you? Even in the old days, the prospectors who made the first fabulous gold strikes filed paperwork to pinpoint where they had staked their claims, even though there was really no government to worry about back then. They had to deal with crooks and claim jumpers, and you still do, even though you're in the 21st century, rather than the 19th. It's easy to predict that people will ring stake your federal and state leaseholds, or say that you are destroying the environment if you don't keep your ducks in a row and dot your I's and cross your T's. And that's always done with federal and state governments. There's no way to get around it, and you must keep all the alphabet soup agencies in America happy, or lose your license to mine, or maybe even your claims. You're on public land, so what else would you expect? Not to mention that nowadays, if it looks like you're finding gold, lots of people get pissed off about it and want to put a stop to it. Maybe even your so-called friends, because leaseholds are so cheap and they won't think it's fair. Do your paperwork and leave as little as possible to the chance that some godlike pencil pusher can shut you down. Now that I've gotten your attention with a car siren, the paperwork requirements aren't all that bad. My 40-acre state leasehold only takes at most a few hours each year to stay current with everybody from Alaska's Department of Natural Resources to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The biggest problem is getting the right forms from the state's Division of Mining, Land, and Water so you can get your stuff done on time. Everything is on their website, but sometimes the forms are from the past year, or there's some other hiccup that stops you from finishing things like you want. But a phone call usually fixes things or answers your questions. What's more, slowly yet surely, it's getting to where you can do everything on your laptop, an iPhone, and zap it to the appropriate agency, and hooray, you're up to date with all the applications, rules, and reports I'm now listing for you. Subchapter 9A, Affidavit of Annual Labor for Mining. This is the biggie. Forget this and you're probably a dead duck. Alaska demands that you summarize your yearly labor for each claim you own before November 30th, which is 90 days after an assessment year of September 1st to August 31st. In other words, you have 3 months in which to tell the state what you did on your leaseholds in the past 12 months to improve them, and you must put a dollar value on that work. If for some reason you are unable or just don't want to perform minimum yearly labor on your leaseholds, then you can pay $100 per claim instead. But this can only be done for 4 consecutive years. Also, the labor affidavit lets you carry your excess labor forward 4 years, meaning you must actually work on your claim every 5th year. I've always felt this particular state form is a bit fuzzy and hard to fill out. But now it's online with fairly clear instructions. So it's only a matter of filling in the blanks and maybe calling the Division of Mining, Land, and Water if you're worried about doing it right. Subchapter 9B, Upland Mining Lease Payment. The Alaska Department of Natural Resources invoices you $206 for the leasehold rent that's due each year, which runs from September to September like the annual labor requirement. It should be paid in August, but must be paid before November 30th no matter what, and it's for the coming year, not the past. The problem that exists is the state says it sends out courtesy bills, but I've never gotten one on time, so I simply mail $206 to the DNR in August so I don't have to worry about it. You can Google the annual rent fact sheet for the fine print on this annual charge, and there are plans to let you pay this online in the future, which will be a big help to everyone. Subchapter 9C, Application for Permits to Mine in Alaska, APMA. Earlier, I wrote that buying an Alaskan gold claim is one thing, but mining there is another. You must get licensed and permitted by as many as a dozen federal and state agencies, which the Division of Mining, Land, and Water has streamlined as much as possible, and what's often referenced by the acronym APMA. It's a single application for everything necessary to prospect and mine on your claims, plus perform reclamation on the ground you've disturbed. The APMA speeds up all the paperwork that's required from claim owners, and most important of all, provides a free reclamation bond if you keep your work site footprint smaller than 5 acres. Bottom line is the APMA is available online. You should always make your application for 5 years, the maximum, rather than for 1 or whatever. So you're not constantly having to redo everything and get this paperwork submitted a year ahead of time. The approval of your APMA provides you with the Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC, permit, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineering, USACE, permit, the Alaska Department of Revenue's mining license, your production royalty report form, and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game's fish habitat permit. Be forewarned, though, some of these agencies require yearly renewals, but there's nothing that takes much work to return to the agency that wants it. Google Alaska's Division of Mining, Land, and Water to start your APMA, since everything is pretty much done online now. Plus, you should read about what it takes to stay on the right side of the different federal and state agencies. In any event, it's not that hard to do. Chapter 10, Happy Days. The happiest days of my life have been spent at my gold mine, but maybe I'm different than most people. I'm good at bush living, bear safety is my business. I probably enjoy building and fixing things even more than mining itself, and wilderness subsistence is right up my alley. I chose my claim carefully, taking into consideration the chances of making money from recovering much gold were doubtful at best, and so I made sure there were other things I could do, like harvesting chaga, making birch syrup, selling wood burls, and renting bear and moose hunting camps to keep some cash coming in. The point I'm trying to make is it's really important for you to enjoy living off the land, rather than thinking you might get rich by digging in the dirt. There's almost always too much dirt in that gold. And as I've already written, it's easier to find diamonds than nuggets. So it's really hard to find a money-making mine. And the dreaded bottom line is even if you do come up with rich ground, the heavy equipment it takes to run an average-sized placer mine is so expensive it takes the fun out of it. You're talking at least $2 or $3 million. And I never wanted to get that serious about it. That's like running a big business, which is never fun. Been there, done that. I can't express the joy it was to get lucky like I did and find a claim on a world-class rainbow and salmon river. People pay $1,000 a day to fish where my mine is located. because that's how good the fishing is. And every time I turn around, I see bald eagles, bears, and moose in their natural habitat. Those experiences are worth a small fortune to me. So the point I'm trying to make is don't buy a gold mine unless it will be the joy of your life. Then it doesn't make so much difference how much gold you find. Keep it fun, interesting, and rewarding in ways that keep you happy. And then you won't think it's work, and you will live forever. That's the big reason why you still find old-timers squirreled away on their Alaskan gold claims, and they couldn't be more content. There's an important lesson to be learned when you understand why that is. Learn it, live it, and good luck in finding the gold mine of your dreams. And even if you want a good-sized mine, make sure the same rule applies. You have been listening to the audio production of Alaska is Made of Gold, Buying an Alaskan Gold Mine. Text copyright 2018 by Tom Rohn. Production copyright 2018 by Tom Rohn.